Take a close look at this map. Green represents the areas with minimal human intervention, while orange, red, and purple indicate regions of more intense human activity. As you see, the developed areas massively prevail on the planet. Humans have taken over 75% of the land outside the ice sheets. Moreover, these places are closely monitored by satellite cameras. It might seem that not a single corner of the planet has escaped them, but that's not true. Even in the 21st century, there are still places hidden from human eyes, some by nature and some by people themselves. Some of them have never been mapped, while others haven't made it to the maps yet, or they were purposefully left out. Consider, for example, Sandy Island, somewhere between Australia and New Caledonia. It was discovered and mapped in the 1770s by none other than James Cook. Despite extensive searches in recent times, no one has found the island, so it was concluded that it never actually existed in the first place. It appeared on Google Maps until November 26, 2012, before being removed. However, there's still an old satellite image from 2009. We have collected a bunch of other hidden places in our list of Top 10 Fascinating Unmapped Places on the Planet. Remember, your likes support this video and help the YouTube algorithm show you more interesting content like that. Click subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming videos. One fascinating hidden corner of the world is the Rebirth Island in the southwestern part of the Aral Sea. Here, there was a place you couldn't find on any map. Now, the sea has become shallow, and the island is turning into a peninsula. Once upon a time, huge herds of saigas grazed there, and the bays were teeming with fish. But then, something unexpected happened. In 1954, the island became the site of a military camp designed to accommodate military personnel, researchers, security staff, and their families. It was a secret base known as Aralsk 7, which remained off the maps and was eventually deserted in the early 1990s following the collapse of the USSR. But you can still find ammunition, shell casings, and ballistic tips there. And now, let's travel to a place where no one has set foot. It is located between China and Bhutan. This is Mount Gangar Punsum, with a height of 7,570 meters, 24,836 feet, also known as the White Peak of the Three Spiritual Brothers. This is the highest unclimbed peak on the planet, and the 40th highest mountain in the world. Remarkably, all attempts to ascend it were unsuccessful. This is especially surprising given that most of the peaks in the Himalayas were conquered decades ago. China and Bhutan have long argued over who owns it. While Chinese maps show the peak lies right on the border, other sources place it entirely within Bhutan. The first measurements and mapping of the mountain were done in 1922. At that time, the region was still pretty inaccurately mapped. Until recently, its depiction varied across maps, with inconsistent locations and elevations, to the extent that one of the initial expedition teams couldn't find it. Bhutan remained closed to mountaineers until 1983, because the high peaks were believed to be the home of spirits. Between 1985 and 1986, when the country finally opened its doors, there were 4 attempts to climb the mountain, but none of them was successful. By 1994, the government banned climbing mountains higher than 6,000 meters, 19,685 feet, out of respect for local spiritual beliefs. And since 2004, mountaineering has been completely prohibited in Bhutan. In 1998, when there was still no complete ban in place, a Japanese expedition received permission from the Chinese Mountaineering Association to climb Gangkhar Puensum from the Tibetan side, north of Bhutan. However, a long-running border dispute with Bhutan eventually led to the permit's withdrawal. To date, Bhutan itself hasn't yet surveyed the peak and seems to have little interest in doing so anytime soon. Given the difficulty of obtaining government permits, it's likely that the mountain will remain untouched for many years to come. It turns out that we don't know much about this place, but thanks to chance, we know exactly what we'll find in the next one. All thanks to environmental scientist Dr. Julian Bayliss. In 2012, Bayliss discovered a new ecosystem using satellite images. He found a strange spot in Mozambique, which turned out to be a pristine tropical forest inside a cratered mountain. This was Mount Liko in the north of the country. The scientist examined this volcano-like mound, rising sharply up. The walls of the crater are 700 meters high in parts and sheer, with a patch of dark green forest. 5 years later, having assembled a team of scientists, naturalists, and researchers, Dr. Bayliss flew to Mozambique. Talking to local communities around the base of Mount Liko, he was informed that no one had ever been up the mountain. The scientist assessed the route using satellite imagery and set out for his hike. He brought along a drone to have a closer look at the mountain, which until then was only captured by satellite. The drone launch was a success, revealing the mountain's hidden world, which was supposedly never seen by human eyes. Then, Bayliss and his colleagues made quite an arduous ascent. Even though the climb was challenging, it proved to be fruitful. The team was excited to see a lush forest with vines and lianas, as well as discover several previously unknown species of animals and birds. There was also a new species of butterfly, an unknown species of amphibian, a freshwater crab, and various never-seen-before small mammals and reptiles. Mysteriously, the group also found some upturned pots at the source of a stream, suggesting that they were probably a spiritual offering from a medicine man to keep the water flowing down to the settlements below. No one could imagine how a person could ever reach that point, as Dr. Bayliss's team needed to use special climbing equipment to climb the sheer crater walls. How do we know that these were most likely ritual offerings? The fact is that Mount Liko and many other East African mountains are called Inselbergs, that is, island mountains. These formations emerged as the surrounding plateau eroded away, leaving behind more erosion-resistant materials like granite. Eventually, they began to contrast so sharply in altitude with the adjacent lowlands that they started to influence the local weather patterns. They create clouds and cause rain as air rises from the warm lowlands to the cooler upper regions. This is why Liko and other East African Inselbergs serve as vital sources of water for surrounding lowlands, and locals call them rain-making mountains, which explains why the pots that were left at the top were likely a form of homage and offering to the mountain. Next, we explore another blank spot on the map, Lake Vostok. At the southern pole of cold, that is, the area of the globe with the lowest recorded temperatures in this hemisphere, beneath the surface of the Antarctic ice sheet, 3,488 meters, 11,444 feet below the Russian research station Vostok, there is an accumulation of water the size of Lake Ontario. This is Lake Vostok. It is currently the largest subglacial lake in the world. It is estimated that the average temperature of the water in this lake is -3 degrees Celsius, 27 degrees Fahrenheit. It does not freeze because of the high pressure of the weight of the ice above it. Geothermal heat from the Earth's depths warm the bottom of the lake, while the ice sheet insulates it from the low temperatures at the surface. Scientists estimate that the ice cover over Lake Vostok has existed for about 15 million years. Biologists assume that the lake is home to microorganisms that may have entered the lake during its formation and have since then adapted to the extreme conditions and exceptionally low nutrient concentrations that prevail there. Since Lake Vostok has been under ice for millions of years, the organisms in it must have evolved independently over this period. This may have led to the emergence of life forms that are unique to this strange place. Hence, scientists plan to explore this and other subglacial lakes in Antarctica. Before this, however, glaciologists need to learn more about the ice above the lake, as well as the rocks and sediments beneath it. Actually, the first person to suggest the existence of a subglacial lake in the region was geographer Andrei Kapitsa. Subsequent studies have confirmed his hypothesis. Other lakes in central Antarctica were mentioned by a pilot, Rady Robinson. It is believed that he discovered them in 1959. How? The surface above such large subglacial lakes remains flat and smooth. He noticed such places and suggested the existence of such lakes when they were still only a scientific assumption and not a fact. A study over Lake Vostok was conducted 3 years later, and in 1967, glaciologist Igor Zodakov wrote his PhD thesis on the topic of the enormous pressure of the ice sheet and turning its lower parts into water. Another probing took place in the 1970s, and a comprehensive study in the early 1990s led to the convening of an international conference on Lake Vostok, held in Cambridge in 1994. It is unlikely to be inhabited by fish or other large creatures. Presumably, there will be just bacteria. Many biologists want to take water samples from Lake Vostok. The difficulty is figuring out how to sample water covered by 4-kilometer, 2.5-mile thick ice. The task is further complicated by ensuring that the lake is not contaminated during the probing process. Otherwise, its value to science would be at risk. The drilling crews working at Vostok Station since 1970 would simply drill through the ice and lower the equipment into the lake. But in case of drilling, the lake would be contaminated with kerosene, which is used to lubricate the drill and prevent the borehole above it from freezing. Other groups of scientists have proposed developing a different scheme for lowering scientific instruments into the lake, such as one that involves using hot water for thawing. In 2012, a Russian research team did drill through the ice in the classical way to the surface of the lake and obtained samples, which were sent for study, among others, to France. As a result, previously unknown bacteria were discovered, which may be unique inhabitants of Lake Vostok. But now, let's sail 1,700 kilometers, 1,100 miles away from Antarctica, and even away from the continents, to find ourselves on an island that is 93% covered by glaciers. It is the most remote island in the world that can hardly be found on a map. It is located in the South Atlantic at the southern tip of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. The nearest inhabited land is the island of Tristan da Cunha, a British overseas territory, 2,253 kilometers, 1,400 miles to the north. The island is administered by Norway and has been declared an uninhabited protected nature reserve. It has an area of 49 square kilometers, 19 square miles, and the center of the island is an ice-filled crater of an extinct volcano. The island was discovered in 1739 by Frenchman Jean-Baptiste Charles Bouvet de Lozier during the in the South Atlantic, but they did not reach the coast. The next time the island was encountered was in 1808 by the British, who named it Lindsay Island. In 1825, the British Crown claimed rights to it and named it Liverpool Island. In 1927, the first Norwegian expedition landed there and claimed it as belonging to Norway. This is when the island was given its present name, Bouvet Island. In 1930, after a dispute with the United Kingdom was resolved, Bouvet Island was declared Norwegian property. Due to its remote location, Bouvet Island never became a widely visited site. It was therefore surprising when an abandoned lifeboat was found near it in 1964. No sign of a man was spotted on the island, but this mystery attracted the attention of writers. So far, Boult Island has been the site of action for at least 3 books and the 2004 movie Alien vs. Predator. In the movie, the screenwriters decided to use the island's Norwegian name, Buvatoya. But the island shown in the movie is actually far away from the real Boult Island. Its northwestern part is mostly ice-free, and a weather station is located there. There are also fur seals and chinstrap penguins and macaroni penguins on Boult Island. The latter is one of the most common species in the world and can be easily recognized by its distinctive orange feathers. These migratory penguins feed almost exclusively on crustaceans, preferring to reproduce in areas with rocky slopes. This makes Boult Island an almost perfect place for them. In total, there are more than 4,500 macaroni penguins and about 400 chinstrap penguins there. Besides them, there are orcas and humpback whales living close to the shore. This is what the local fauna looks like. But what about humans? No man has ever wintered on the island. In addition, its development is very complicated due to the problems of bringing expeditions to the island. Glaciers prevent landing on the southern and eastern coasts, and steep cliffs up to 490 meters, 1,607 feet high, prevent access in the north, west, and southwest. So a helicopter is the most convenient means to access the island, which lacks natural harbors. This brings up the advantage of visiting this island, the opportunity to see a place with virtually no infrastructure, which is becoming increasingly difficult to do in today's world. Such an expedition would definitely take you away from your normal daily life. And here's a place you can't visit because it exists, but it kind of doesn't. How can that be? Let's take a look at the North Pacific. If you look at the map, you won't see anything. But in fact, there is a large Pacific garbage patch. It spans an area equivalent to 3 times the size of France, extending from the west coast of North America to Japan. The patch is made up of 2 parts, the western garbage patch spreading out near Japan, and the eastern garbage patch between the US states of Hawaii and California. These areas are connected by a zone where the warm waters of the South Pacific meet the cooler waters of the Arctic. The zone acts like a highway where trash moves from one area to another. The trash in the patch accumulates because much of it is non-biodegradable. For example, plastic just breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. So if you imagined the garbage patch simply as trash floating in the ocean, you're wrong. It's actually made up almost entirely of microplastics. You can't always see it with the naked eye. Even satellite images don't show a giant patch of trash. It's just that the water in the area looks like muddy soup, and it's mixed in with larger items like fishing nets and shoes. Why is it plastic that makes up the biggest part of the marine debris? Firstly, because of its durability and low cost, it is being used increasingly. Secondly, as already mentioned, it does not undergo biodegradation, but simply breaks down into smaller pieces. By the way, you could see a no less interesting picture if you were to dive to the bottom beneath the large Pacific garbage patch. The thing is that as oceanographers and ecologists have recently discovered, about 70% of marine debris sinks to the ocean floor. No one knows for sure how much trash is in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. What complicates the task for scientists is the fact that not all debris floats on the surface. Denser fragments can sink centimeters, inches, or even several meters, feet below the surface, making volume measurement nearly impossible. It is estimated that 80% of the plastic in the ocean comes from land-based sources, and the remaining 20% from boats and other marine sources. Of course, these percentages vary depending on the region. And half of the mass of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is made up of, guess what? synthetic fishing nets. And of course, the garbage harms the local fauna. Turtles, albatrosses, seals, and other marine animals get tangled in the nets and drown. Or, for example, feed garbage to their young mistakenly. Ecologists did not remain unaffected by the problem and came up with an interesting idea for cleaning up the area. The publisher Lad Bible teamed up with Plastic Oceans Foundation in 2018 and called for a new state to be founded on the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and for people to become its citizens with their own passports and currency. The eccentric initiative, launched for the sake of drawing attention to the problem, found its supporters. More than 200,000 people have already become so-called citizens of the Garbage Islands, including Chris Hemsworth, Mark Ruffalo, and other stars. Of course, this initiative cannot be taken seriously, but despite its hilarious nature, it is a good way to draw attention to the problem, and thus find methods and means to solve it. Our next island, however, does exist, and some animals live there very happily. We are talking about Okunoshima, or unofficially, Rabbit Island. It is a small island located in the inland sea of Japan. It is just over 4 kilometers, 2.5 miles in circumference, and can be walked around in about an hour and a half. This tourist attraction is home to hundreds of wild European rabbits that roam the island. Seems like a harmless little place, right? But it was once erased from the map. But first things first. In general, Okunoshima became famous in 2014 when a video of a woman being trampled by rabbits went viral. As a result, while 136,000 people visited the island in 2005, their number grew to 254,000 in 2015. Since then, other viral videos showing flocks of rabbits on the island have attracted guests to the island. Of course, there is a downside to this popularity. Due to the intense human intervention, the ecological situation on the island is now not so safe for the animals. But how did the rabbits get to this island, you may wonder? That's a good question, and there's no answer to it because no one really knows that for sure. There are rumors that the rabbits were brought to the island by a British couple, or that a nearby school let them out in 1971. Estimates vary, but in 2007, there were about 300 rabbits on the island, and now the number has grown to between 700 and 1,000. European rabbits from Okunoshima chew leaves, roots, wood, seeds, and occasionally snack on manure. But most tourists have heard that rabbits also eat carrots, lettuce, and cabbage, so this is the kind of food they bring along as treats. This diet is ruinous to the island's furry inhabitants, as their digestive systems have difficulty digesting vegetables. There are signs all over the island warning that rabbits are not to be fed, picked up, or chased. However, there was an exception to this rule. The hotel used to sell food so that tourists could feed the fluffy animals, for example, in winter when food was scarce. But this practice was terminated. Rabbits are given only bottled water. Why? The thing is that the island has never undergone large-scale decontamination operations after it was used for chemical testing, and the residual toxins poisoned the groundwater. So most of the rabbits live in the grass near the hotel, waiting to be fed and hydrated. And the next location is a place where both humans and other living creatures can shelter in the event of a terrible disaster. This is the Norat Complex in Cheyenne Mountain. Have you ever seen the hit Hollywood movies War Games and Stargate? That's where parts of Cheyenne Mountain were featured. We are talking about a guarded underground bunker of the U.S. Armed Forces, which is closed to the public and is situated in the state of Colorado. It was meant to be a shield against Soviet long-range bombers at the height of the Cold War in the late 1950s. What makes it one of the safest places in the world? The Cheyenne Mountain Complex lies beneath a layer of granite at an altitude of 600 meters, 2,000 feet, and spreads over an area of 2 hectares, 20,000 square meters. The facility has 6 tunnels, each 3 stories high. It consists of 15 buildings resting on shock-absorbing springs and is protected against seismic activity and nuclear explosions. The 2 main blast doors leading into the complex close in about 45 seconds. They are 1 meter, 3.5 feet thick, and weigh more than 20 tons. The doors only close in case of an emergency. The complex can withstand a 30 megaton nuclear explosion at a distance of up to 2 kilometers, 1.24 miles. This is twice as much as the most powerful U.S. thermonuclear bomb, Castle Bravo. The complex also has unique filters to capture airborne biochemical, radiological, and atomic contaminants. There are several centers here that warn of missile, atmospheric, and space threats. They include, first of all, the Air Operations Center. It maintains continuous control of North American airspace to prevent enemy aircraft from entering. The center monitors more than 2.5 million such flights each year. Secondly, there is a Ballistic Missile Defense Center. It detects missile launches around the world and determines whether they pose a threat to the North American region. And third, the Space Defense Operations Center. Today, it tracks more than 8,000 items, including cargoes, rocket bodies, and debris. The bunker's command center was upgraded in 2003 and 2004 for $13 million. Since 2008, the complex has been used for U.S. Air Force aircrew training and as a backup command center. Do you think this facility is classified? Then how about an entire country? North Korea is known to be the most closed state in the world. On Google Maps, information about it is pretty limited. This is a bit frightening. Just imagine how its citizens live, virtually cut off from the rest of the world. That's why you can't find Room 39 on maps. This is the name of a secret North Korean party organization. Its official name is Central Committee Bureau 39 of the Workers' Party of Korea. It was founded by Kim Jong-il, the son of then-President Kim Il-sung, back in the late 1970s. How did the organization get its name? It's quite simple. Room 39 is the largest office of the 3 North Korean secret services known to the world. In addition to it, there are 2 other important services: Office 35, dealing with intelligence, and Office 38, responsible for legal financial activities of the party. They used to be located on the 3rd floor where Kim Jong-il's office used to be, so these 3 services are nicknamed the 3rd floor by the rest of the world. But Room 39 is the most mysterious and controversial of them all because of its mission. What exactly does this organization do? Well, here's where it gets interesting. It is estimated to make between $500 million and $1 billion a year or more through illegal activities such as counterfeiting $100 bills, international insurance fraud, and production of controlled substances. Other activities attributed to Room 39 include selling made-in-North Korea clothing with a sewn-in made-in-China label, selling artificial eyelashes, eyebrows, and beards, and buying Russian oil for cheap through dealers in Singapore. In 2006, some Western media reported that this secret service brought in up to 50% of all North Korean revenues. However, the details of the work of this service are thoroughly concealed from its citizens, and even more so from foreigners. No one even knows the name of the head of the organization, although there are rumors that Room 39 was headed for a long time by a former classmate of the country's leader, Kim Jong-il. But this, like many other things related to North Korea, is uncertain. Of course, pop culture couldn't miss such a mysterious object. Room 39 appears in the 2005 video game Mercenaries: Playground of Destruction. The former foreign minister of North Korea heads it there. It also appears in the 5th season of the British-American series Strike Back: Legacy. And we approach the final object of our journey through interesting places that cannot be found on the map. And it literally cannot be found. in the international waters of the Atlantic Ocean, about 600 kilometers, 370 miles off the coast of West Africa, in the Gulf of Guinea is nothing. Actually, according to the maps, there is an island there. You know well what it is in the usual sense, a piece of land surrounded by water. But there is no land in the place in question. There is nothing but a buoy, which fulfills an important, though quite ordinary mission. It measures wind speed and direction, air temperature, precipitation, humidity, solar radiation, pressure, and temperature up to 500 meters, 1,600 feet below the ocean surface. By the way, it has a very poetic name, Soul. It is named after a musical genre and is part of a system of 17 buoys placed in the tropical Atlantic Ocean. Soul is described as a 1 square meter island with a scale rank 100. This means that it should never be shown on maps. Soul appeared in 1997 and less than a year later disappeared. It was replaced with a new one in 1998. It's been floating there since, 3.8 meters, 12 feet high, and attached to the seabed. And the seabed is, just imagine, 4,940 meters, 16,210 feet below it. The nearest land to Null Island is a small island, a real one this time, 570 kilometers, 354 miles to the north, which is part of Ghana. But this place is notable in particular because the equator and the zero meridian intersect here. That is, its coordinates are 0 longitude and 0 latitude. Partly because of this, Null Island has become a cartographer's joke. Let's go into a little more detail here. When addresses are added to a map, a program called a geocoder turns the physical address into geo-coordinates. As a result, the location is easily plotted on the map. But sometimes errors occur, which in turn causes the geocoding program to make errors. It then indicates that there is no information or that the data is 0.0. And what happens at that point? Bingo! The program sees those coordinates and starts correlating them to some null island near Africa. This is what happened to Seoul, and more than once. For some time in the late noughties, only geographers knew about this so-called island. But then it became famous, quite unexpectedly. The thing is that the fitness app Strava detected high activity there, as if it was full of people running and doing other sports. Although, as you may recall, there's nothing on the map at that spot. Nevertheless, according to the geotags, the activity of fitness enthusiasts was off the charts. People began to suspect that something was wrong here. Some speculated that there was a classified base there, either Chinese or American. But it was probably because users were entering 0.0 coordinates in a fitness tracking app to hide their location. That is, without knowing it, they entered the location of the island. Eventually, a local African company started taking tourists to Null Island, and instead of the island, the tourists saw, yes, the weather buoy Seoul. The island was overall so intriguing that it even got its own website, though it's now shut down. It also has a flag, and the geographers took it a step further. They named the place the Republic of Null Island, and came up with a history and a cartographic image for it. In general, there are still many corners and sites in the world that have not left a trace on the map, or have been deliberately concealed by man. What do they hide? This is yet to be discovered.